businesses like mine, we work on 2% generally.
But if we want robust, resilient businesses in 2030, 40, 50, then we have to really come back to our mission and what we want to achieve.
Change is not only bad, change is also good. Change is an opportunity. Don't take it personally. Look for the gaps. Love all of that. Gosh, there's a book in there somewhere.
If you can't demonstrate that what you are trying to do is an investable product, why would the banks invest in you?
I'm an unending optimist, other than when I start to think too hard about it. But I think there's opportunity everywhere.
Cornish Mutual, farming insurance experts.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Farming Focus, the podcast for Southwest farmers brought to you by Cornish Mutual. I'm your host, Peter Green. If you've ever wondered where are the opportunities in agriculture and how do we grasp them, critically also how do we develop the best possible mindset to navigate change, then you are in the right place. These are the kind of questions we are asking today as we dive into the 2026 Oxford Farming Conference report, the title of which was UK Farming, Grasping the Opportunities. It was published in January at the Oxford Farming Conference, but its learnings and principles are just as important and applicable today. To discuss this report, I'm joined by its author, Dr Louise Manning, and 13th generation Devon farmer, Andy Gray. Louise, welcome to the show. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
Hi, well, it's great to be here. I am a director of a family farming business in Herefordshire, currently doing consultancy, and I was previously a professor of sustainable agri-food systems at the University of Lincoln. So my husband, all the 36 years being married, will call me his diversification.
I think that's a compliment. I think you should take it as one, definitely.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Thank you ever so much, Louise. And Andy, welcome to you too. It's great to have you on the show finally. Can you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. So I'm Andy Gray. My main business is meat. We take the great foods of the southwest of England and deliver them to the tourist industry via hotels, restaurants and butchers and people like that. And then on our farm, we have various other diversifications like a dog food business and a quarry and a few other startups. And farming is sort of something which we really do more in an experimental way, in as much as we trial various sustainable farming practices to see if they work. And we've set up a new research institute called the Centre for Dynamic Soils.
Wow, lots going on there. Really exciting stuff. So thank you very much. I'm sure we'll hear more about some of that through the podcast. Louise, your Oxford Farming Conference 2026 report is called UK Farming Grasping the Opportunities. For many Southwest farmers right now, they might be struggling to find or to even see opportunities and are just focusing on keeping going. You know, it's that surviving versus thriving piece that we talked about in Series 4, Episode 2 with Eddie Rickson, and that's a great episode for people to go back to if they get the chance. Louise, how did that title evolve and what were you asked to do?
The Oxford Farming Conference asked me, would I like to author the next report? And they very much wanted it to be a report that looked to the future and then said, what do we need to do now to adapt on our farms for us to have a good future? I could have written a report that listed all the problems we currently face in farming. In fact, we could talk for the next half an hour about all the problems that face farming, but you only have to go to ChatGPT and it'll do it for you. We also had the Minette Batters DEFRA profitability review. In fact, she spoke to many of the people I did at the same period of time. What I was encouraged to do was to think about farming in a different way, speak to influencers and disruptors rather than and get their views on what a good future looked like. But also, the more I drew everything together for the report, the more I felt it should be a bottom-up report that actually looked at farming businesses and what people in farming businesses can do to look forward to a good future where they were thriving, not surviving. We have to separate out, and we're talking mostly about England and the Southwest, that we now have very varied policy. So in some devolved nations, we have clear policies where there is still direct payments to farmers. But in England, we now have no payment. We see SFI, with the amount of SFI, Sustainable Farming Initiative, dropping. And I had a very lively discussion with farmers the other day on whether the government has actually broken its social contract with farmers as a result. If that is the case, then we as farmers have to look at our businesses and our duty, and many of us feel we're custodians, but the most important thing that we can do, my husband and I can do with our family farm, is make sure we have a robust, resilient business that supports our generations now and whoever succeeds us in that business. But the report is very much about what can we do.
Andy, your reflections on what you've heard there, what do you think about the title of the Oxford Farming Conference report, Grasping the Opportunities? What does it make you think of? And what do Louise's responses make you think of?
Yeah, I mean, it's incredibly interesting. I'm always slightly perverse in these things. I mean, when I started out, I was a younger brother, so I had no farm. And the great opportunity I hoped for was that everybody else would go bust and the price of land would crash so that I would have an opportunity. So, churn in an industry is itself an opportunity. So defining opportunity is an interesting thing in itself, in as much as most of the time we define it as the maintenance of opportunity for the status quo rather than that churn. So it's moving forward on that basis. But I mean, Louise is mentioning the fact that as a company we've got no money, but that's potential. That an awful lot of that is because the environment in which we run businesses, and I'm somebody who has a sort of weakness for starting businesses, and I can't help myself sometimes. But actually, the environment in which we do, the legislative and the market structures and everything else, is completely stultifying any enthusiasm and any innovation and that sort of thing. So we are where we are partly because we've been led to where we are now. So that to me is a major issue, and I think one of the big opportunities is actually to regulation is another form of tax, in as much as it's costly, it slows you down, it
introduces friction.
It introduces friction, but on top of that, it's also anti-competitive. It benefits for big companies, consolidated companies who have the bandwidth to deal with it and the teams to deal with it. It's same with certification and things like that. So there's opportunities in policy terms in just making it easier and getting out of the way, and then perhaps we can make a bit more money, and then the whole pump is primed again.
I love that. Regulation is something which introduces friction and slows businesses down, and the same with certification. That's a real challenge. I love that. Thank you, Andy. So the report describes the UK farming environment as BANI, or BANI. So the acronym stands for brittle, anxious, non-linear, and incomprehensible. Brittle, anxious, non-linear, and incomprehensible. The Southwest has its own things going on, its own vulnerabilities. It's the second smallest average farm size in England. We've got bovine tuberculosis high risk areas covering virtually the whole of the Southwest. Lots of farmers are dependent on the state of milk and beef prices exclusively. Do you think, Louise, that the Southwest is especially exposed to a banny world, or does it have particular strengths that make it different from that national picture that was outlined in the report?
I don't think currently the Southwest is any more exposed than all farmers in England. But we already have dividing lines. When my daughter's sheep go to Hereford Market, there'll be sheep from Wales where those farmers will have had direct farming payments. And she is farming her sheep in a totally unsubsidized environment. We're seeing a whole range of tensions that are arising. And yes, compared to Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland, I would say the farmers in the Southwest are disadvantaged. However, if you look at how policy is evolving in Wales, Scotland and Ireland, public payments are coming at a price. They're coming at a price of having to do mandatory CPD. and we could debate whether that's a good thing or not.
Yeah,
They're
you
coming, they're coming at a price of increasing prescription on how you can farm. It's not in answering your question, it's not as simple as yes or no. You pick your card you want to talk about, and the Southwest has certain advantages. If we look at the potential for climate change and water, the Southwest going forward does have potential advantages. The ability to plant tree cover for livestock, and to put shade in for livestock. But the challenge is we have to do that now. And if you compare the Southwest to the Southeast in terms of water resources, because of the potentially there is, if you can capture the water, and that's a big if, because when it's going to rain is predicted to change, then yes, the Southwest could have advantages in the future compared to other areas.
So Louise has painted a picture of some pros, some cons, Andy. Are you a glass half full or a glass half empty kind of man? What's your thoughts on what Louise has said there?
I think it's always a joke that you've got the wrong size glass, but that's an engineer's joke. I'm an unending optimist, other than when I start to think too hard about it. But I think there's opportunity everywhere, and it's just whether or not we can get policymakers and ourselves to rise to these challenges. I mean, at the same time, absolutely, we need to build this resilience into the system. Louise is talking about, tree planting for livestock, and I'm always talking about soil resilience and that sort of thing. We need to be understanding that. But this maritime environment we've got down here is really good. If we could only hold on to our tourist industry, then we've got this ready-made market on our doorstep, which is delighted to be tied to the landscape-focused, place-based story that we can tell about it. But at the moment, that's being taxed out of existence. So it's got all these advantages. It's just whether or not we can actually maintain the opportunities by not being closed down by daft policies.
Brilliant. Thank you, Andy. So Louise, I've just recently finished my Nuffield Farming Scholarship, and in there I visited over 60 businesses and found that the ones that were really thriving were quite often mission-led. And you talk about businesses in the UK needing to be mission-led in your report. But for a family dairy farm, let's say in Somerset, milking 200 cows, what does that mean in practice? How are they going to find the time and the skills to develop that mission? What does it look like?
As part of the conversations that I had during the development of the report, I developed a three-page personal and business development tool with a whole series of questions. And I've been using that with farmers over the last 6 months at meetings, getting them to think about some of those questions on that report. On that tool, we may come back to it. Mission-led means you know what you want to achieve. And that's the first of the 4 questions that are the takeaways from the report. What do you want to achieve? And saying, I want to make this farm better than it was when I took it over isn't enough. What do you want to achieve? And one of the challenges of that is also being honest with yourself and saying any enterprise I have on my farm that is not making a profit is a hobby. Now, we can all have hobbies, and we can all do things because we want to. And I live in Herefordshire, and what's not to like? I know you've got South Devons, but what's not to like about having Hereford cattle in the field? And I love South Devons too when I come down to Devon. But the question is, if they're not making me money, what else in my business is? And for many businesses in the Southwest and around the country, they have chosen to diversify to subsidise agriculture and subsidise their agricultural enterprises. But first of all, if we're going to be mission-led, we have to sit down and say, what do we want to achieve? And I outlined some of those. My daughter, for example, she wants a sheep flock on the farm that's easy care, low labour, is one with the environment in which they are living, that we can then develop our farm around them to have a strong, robust, resilient flock of livestock, but also have a financially resilient business. However, in 5 or 10 years' time, sheep may not be the enterprise to be in. My husband had to take out my father-in-law's life's work from the farm. My father-in-law was a hop farmer. And when the market went, when we said this is not viable, and what we wanted to achieve was a profitable business that supported the family members. That was our mission. My husband had to take out my father-in-law's life's work. And he stood next to me looking over a gate as he watched all his hop yards being taken down. And he said to me about my husband, he's doing the right thing. And that's really challenging.
Wow.
And that is really challenging. And we, as a generation, I'm in my 60s, the next generation that comes along may well have to say, as part of being mission-led, some of the things that we've done, actually, the time is over for that. Sadly, my mother-in-law recently died. She was 94. And until the day she had her stroke at 4:30 every afternoon, she would go round the farm with her stick, with her high vis. I made her wear a high vis. And she'd pick up baler twine that was lying around and put it in the skip. She saw such changes from when she was born in 1931. My daughter had a computerized milk machine. My mother-in-law started with buckets with calves when she was a child. Yep. We sometimes forget how agile we are as a community in embracing change, in moving forward. And I think we just need to capture some of that again. What we're being asked to do now isn't what farmers haven't. Farmers have been asked to do that through each generation. It looks different. That churn is very painful. But if we want robust, resilient businesses in 2030, 40, 50, then we have to really come back to our mission and what we want to achieve.
I mean, and change is inevitable. That's one of the inevitable things in life. The difficulty is the speed of change, and the speed of people acquiring different things from landscapes. So, the whole world suddenly going. I mean, I'm very keen on the whole sort of soil end of things, but you can't just turn around to somebody who spent £3 million on a dairy and tell him that he needs to head off in another direction. We engineer huge costs into our businesses because it looks right at the time, and the fact that we've got a world which is changing so quickly, I think, is one of the greatest challenges that faces our sector. And embracing change, I think farmers are brilliant at embracing change, but it's also really tough to do it if you've just put an enormous capital investment into a something.
And if I could just come back in, because I'm getting very energized now about the discussion. What Andy's just described is lock-in. So if I've got a large HP, I'm an arable farmer, and I've got a large HP bubble at the end of my payments, I've got a financial lock-in to keep on being an arable farmer. If I've invested in one kind of technology, and the challenge we face in the next 20 years is that technology is going to become obsolete so quickly, I now have lock-in to stay with that technology in my business. But what it's doing is making me less and less competitive. And one of the challenges we've got is, in some other work, I've described it as unlocking strategies, talking to farmers, right? If we're locked into this way of doing, this way of production, whether that's changing how we manage our soils, whatever it is, what are the unlocking? Let's be positive and think about what are the unlocking strategies, and that could be financial, it could be social, it could be we've got knowledge gaps. What are the unlocking strategies to help us embrace that change?
The tension that I sense in what you've both said there is that I agree farmers have shown agility in changing the techniques and the methods, but my contention is that governments have asked UK farmers to produce more and better quality for less cost over 3 generations. And actually, that's how, in part, we get locked into these certain ways of thinking and these certain sectors in agriculture. And I'm really interested in the mindset piece that is suggested in this report, Louise, which I love. I think it's a great characterization. So you identify 3 mindsets in UK farming. There's the doom loop, where anxiety sort of feeds in action, and we'll just keep making the same decisions we've always made because it's simpler and it's less of a challenge. There's the drawbridge, where farmers maybe retreat, shut the world out. And then there's this last one, which I love and I'm really drawn to, this growth opportunity mindset. And this is something that I saw again and again when I went to 4 different continents, to 7 different countries for my Nuffield travels. Those people who are open to seeing challenges as chances to evolve. How do we encourage more farmers to get into that last group, Louise? That's the big question for me.
A lot of the anxiety is because we're not in the driving seat in our businesses. There's a lot of prescription. There's a sense that we're being told what to do. Even if you read the new farming roadmap, it's very prescriptive on this is what a good future looks like. But for many farmers and individual farming businesses, the future might be quite different to what is being put forward in that landscape. That doesn't mean it's wrong. That doesn't mean it's less resilient or less in keeping with nature recovery, recovering soils, etc., etc. But what we have to recognise is there is so much out there that is noise that we cannot control. I can't control what DEFRA does, what decisions they make, what SFI options they have. What I can control is how reliant my business is on them. You can only take advantage of opportunity if you have the space to do it. So the 4 questions that we ask farmers and farming businesses to think about in the report is, what are you trying to achieve? What should you keep doing? And what's the rationale for what you should keep doing? What should you stop doing? And what can you do instead? So just because you stop doing something now doesn't mean that you won't do it in the future. How you make your farm dynamic to be able to go in there. And I recognise it's much harder in practice to go in and out of some enterprises. But if there isn't a value proposition for you to do something in the business, if the risk outweighs the benefit, then we have to stop doing things. And the last one is, what can we do instead?
Okay, thank you. Andy, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, speaking from my personal experience, we are very nimble. We are very context driven. So, I've got a meat business, which processes 4,500 deer. So as a consequence, whilst I'm not that mad about deer farming, I'm too busy to keep sheep. And I've got a route to market on my own farm, which is that deer processing unit. So I find the world is full of opportunities. Instinctively, I'm a direct marketeer. My family were cider makers and have been for 450 years. And the cider kept us going through recessions. People drink when they're happy, they drink when they're sad, they just drink. So in my world, we build resilience into systems with enough diversity in the system, but also the ability to be nimble and to change direction. Because, as I said before, there's one thing which is most inevitable is change. But most of the opportunities I find are inspired by where I am, what we feel we're quite good at, but most importantly, whether I can sell it. I've never been a commodity producer. I've always dictated the price that people will pay me, rather than gone out to the end of a lane and said, I've got something, do you want to buy it? So everybody's context is different.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank you, Andy. And I'm really interested in what you say there about keeping nimble and making sure that you've got opportunity built into or the ability to take opportunities built into your business. And Louise, you've evidenced doing that as well, with sort of getting out of beef and sheep and then coming back into it later on when the risk profile looked different. I'm also really interested, Andy, in what you said about being a direct marketeer at heart, because in the report, there is this piece around an evolution, if you like, from being commodity producer, from having a farm that operates almost like a factory producing a commodity product, to going towards diversification and then towards stewardship. And in the report, it talks about this being facilitated by greater gearing. The point is that UK farming is not as highly geared as it might be. And despite that, we are still making a loss. So, Louise, Can you talk to us a little bit about that and what the opportunities for farmers are around that, and specifically what farmers can do to move from point A, commoditized production, if they have that mindset and are keen to do so, towards through diversification and towards that stewardship, please?
I'm not sure it's that binary. And I would say you don't want to be a business that's in the middle. You don't want to be a business that's neither a commodity business with a scale and a structure and infrastructure that drive low margin, high volume. That may be a business model. You could say, right, I'm going to cut my number of cows I've got to 25, as been some examples around where we live. I'm going to put vending machines in all the major towns. I am going to change what I do. And for some farmers, that's going to be a real challenge. And my job is now servicing those vending machines. But I am adding value, much more value pre-farm gate. I have been privileged to have taught students, and these aren't the only agricultural universities and colleges in the country, but I've been privileged to have engaged and mentored with students at Cirencester, Harper, Lincoln over my academic career. And it fills me with such joy to see their farming businesses where they're putting on-farm vending because it's appropriate for where they are, where they're now linking that to shepherds' huts in the fields, so that the people will go and get milk, and they're looking at how they serve. But what they are looking at is the value proposition and value addition. How do I keep more of the money pre-farm gate? So I was talking on a panel down the southeast in April, and one of the farmers said they had 1 million people within an hour's drive of their farm. There are only 181,000 people in Herefordshire. What was viable and a value proposition for them in their farm with tourism and everything else and being a destination farm, our farm, it's totally different. So it's got to be very farm specific. It's got to align with the skill set you have as the farming family or in your team. And it's got to be an investable product that either you invest your own money in, and that we could talk about gearing, or you have got to give that proposition to a financer and they're going to invest their money. If you can't demonstrate that what you are trying to do is an investable product, why would the banks invest in you?
So that's really interesting for me with my finance background. So when we spoke to Jeremy Otey back in January, beginning of Series 6, we did a review of the Oxford Farming Conference, and he was talking about how farms need to become investable businesses, which is just what you're talking about. This can only happen, the suggestion is, when we meet these 9 C's of investability. So those are carbon, capacity, character, climate, compliance, collateral, commerciality, and conditions. There's a lot of them, but do feel free to check the report to go back to them. Andy, to what extent do you think farmers feel able to focus on all of these, or is that just too much, and focusing on 1, 2, or 3 is all they can manage? What's your experience?
I mean, the whole thing of government telling us that we should be diversifying and direct marketing fills me with rage, to be perfectly honest, because we've lived in an environment where all the what I call the missing middle, the small abattoirs, the processing and everything else has completely collapsed and disappeared. So we're now basically as farmers selling into a massively consolidated supply chain where the supply chain's got all the power to say 5 or maybe 6 or 7 big routes to market now, which are the major supermarkets, with very, very little opportunity to go elsewhere. And if you're a wheat producer, then selling through a relatively small number of. I think that the cereal side of things is different, but from the point of view of the direct marketing of food, it's just really, really difficult. And that's what I do. I know it's really difficult, and most of my competitors almost all my competitors have gone bust over the years, and there's very few left. So I have a hobby of building small abattoirs at the moment. I'm building one on the Scillies and one on the Orkneys, and I'm building one here, trying to row back on that lost bit of the route to market for farmers, because we're talking about selling stuff where you've got all those C's and you want to maybe take control of what happens downstream from your farm. But if you've got no way of doing it and nobody's giving you any incentive, we give £2.4 billion a year to, I say give, but 2.4 billion is set aside to assist agriculture. But the route to market is just left by policy to the vagaries of the reductive capitalist system, which just closes everything down other than the uber efficient and the uber big, regardless of the value that it adds to society and everybody else. So it's this inability to link true values into a system which only rewards the final pennies. And businesses like mine, we work on 2% generally. So and most of the meat trade works on about 2% net. So it's not like we're that excitingly investable anyway, because it's so aggressively competitive.
And that was something that was really interesting for me. In starting out my Nuffield scholarship, I was trying to find out where the money went, follow the money. And actually, it turns out that all of the links we have in the chain, and there are many links, and as you suggest, we have a very sophisticated supermarket ecosystem right at the end of it. None of those links are really making double-digit profits. They're not making 10, 15% profit. They're all just making 1 or 2%. There's just quite a few of them, and a lot of them are trading in real volume. So that was a challenge for me, thinking about where we can take some more of that final few pennies, as you put it, and get it to the consumer. It wasn't a straightforward thing to do. But Louise, I want to come back to you, if I may, and ask about the investability of businesses. And I'm really conscious of time here, so I might just have to ask with slightly shorter answers, even though I'm really loving the conversation. But we're encouraged to create these investable businesses, and as an industry to maybe take on a little bit more debt where the opportunity exists. And I hear what you say in your previous answers, but banks are only going to lend if businesses can service the debt. And so we need to make sure there is a proposition there where the business can have enough turnover, enough income to service that debt. How do we structure, maybe let's call it patient capital? And I saw some examples of this in sort of mutuals and cooperatives in Canada particularly, or perhaps government-backed guarantees, so that we can get new entrants or smaller businesses an opportunity to borrow, to invest, to develop their own businesses.
So whilst people that have been to the Oxford Farming Conference have taken this concept as being about finance, it's actually about something far more. Why would the next generation invest their lives in my business? Why would they? Why would they? Why would someone in my management team invest their whole career in my business? So being an investable product as a business goes far wider. Why would my local community see me as an investable product in return for in how I manage the footpaths on my farm? It goes much wider than the finance alone. But there are some specific aspects of finance. If I want a 30-year loan for my business, if my bank knows, because they've all done the assessment, they already know, especially in the Southwest, whether in 2050 my farm will be liable to flooding, to having soil erosion, to having extremes of drought, they will turn to me fairly soon and say, sorry, you can't have the money. And it's just a wake-up call, these 9 C's, to get people thinking about, if I, as the next generation, asking my parents to invest £1 million in my idea, how is my idea an investable product? Have I thought about what the impact will be on climate? Have I thought about what the return on capital is? Have I thought about a security for the loan? Am I asking my parents to take out a first charge on the farm so that I can go into this enterprise? If I want to go on the farm from 0 sheep to 1,300 ewes, and that is essentially that capital that's coming out of a family business because it's now in the field, not somewhere else, either invested in somewhere else or sitting in a bank, how do I, as that individual within that business, whether I want to do share farming or whatever it is, how do I deliver and communicate that this is worth investing in, worth investing money, time, and energy?
There's some awesome challenges there. I love that question. Why would our children want to come back into our business? And you sort of started with that one. And then why would our community want to engage with us, whether that's buying or just using our footpaths and things like that? Part of the way you themed your question there was that it's not just financial. And Andy, my question for you is, I think there's a quote in the report which says, change is not optional. It's a continuous, ongoing process. But we've heard there that we're not just looking at money. It's not just financial. Change costs money, yes, but time and energy, right, as well. And at the moment, many Southwest farmers are feeling short of all three. So what can farmers in the Southwest do if they're feeling pinched on this? And perhaps, what's been your experience of making a difficult change despite feeling, a bit tight on one or three, or all three of those different parameters?
It is really tough if it's coming at you thick and fast. The problem is I'm now imagining that scenario where you are right up hard against it in terms of cash flow and that sort of thing. And in those situations, what you're trying to do is strip costs out of your business and trying to sharpen up the proposition by putting fewer inputs in. But most of our agricultural systems actually do work when they're pretty productive. So, it's a really difficult question to answer because that change is coming so quickly. I think one has to have the mindset to be able to accept that is the case. But I don't think it's easy. I know that doesn't answer the question, but it's not easy.
Sometimes the truth hurts, and that I would far rather that you were honest about it. So, Louise, if a Southwest dairy farmer, let's say in Dorset with 170 cows, they've got a family farm, mid-size, real financial pressures, the sort that Andy was perhaps just thinking about. If they were listening to this episode, if they read the executive summary of your report this evening, and tomorrow morning they had resolved to do one specific thing differently, what might that thing be?
I would say answer those 4 questions. What do you want to achieve? What are you going to keep doing? What potentially do you need to stop doing? And what can you do instead? Yeah. And the real challenge for many farmers that are in that space is having had that thought process. Download the business and personal development tool. There's lots of questions. Do 2, 3, 5, including there's one in there. Why would the next generation come into the business? There's a whole range of them that may or may not be relevant to the business, but start to ask those questions and sit down at the kitchen table and be honest, because the real challenge is there will be competing views on what opportunities look like. There will be, and the only way you work your way through that is through conversation. So that's what I would suggest. And I'm not suggesting that for that farmer, we're having to do that ourselves in our own family business. And it's got pretty tough over the last 2 years with looking at things like succession, what a resilient business looks like in 5 or 10 years. Do we invest with the caps that have now been put on inheritance tax to make your farm worth more, to then go over to then have all the tax issues at the end and all the uncertainty? But the only way that we're going to get through that is to communicate.
I was sort of brought up with this Presbyterian work ethic that if you haven't got your head below your knees, you're not actually doing what you ought to be doing. But I always make more money when I leave the farm and go and talk to people and get ideas and get energized and all those things. And the other thing I would say, going back to the question, having considered it further, I war game everything all the time. I look at all the different scenarios of both past and future. I look at the enterprises I've dropped and revisit them to see if they should come back again. The world moves on, the technology's changed, the market changes, but you have to adapt. You have to get your brain into the position where you accept not only is change bad, but change is also good, and change is opportunity. So what didn't work 10 years ago might work now. The world does change in every way, not just for ways, but trying to beat you up. So don't take it personally, and look for the gaps. I've always filled niches, and I know most of the world isn't a niche producer. It's other things, but the reality is that markets and everything else changes. So keep looking for the changes which benefit you alongside of the changes which give you a kicking.
Change is not only bad, change is also good. Change is an opportunity. Don't take it personally. Look for the gaps. Love all of that. Gosh, there's a book in there somewhere. So my final question, Andy, I'm going to come to you with this one. 20 years from now, 25 years from now, when we get to 2045, 2050, is Southwest farming going to be in a better place than it is today? And why?
Well, it's so difficult to tell because the big unknown is the impact of climate change. I'm reasonably optimistic in some ways because I do believe that drone technology and things like that will actually benefit the smaller farm in the end, that we'll be able to buy farming as a service from planting and spraying and that sort of thing. And I think that might potentially tip the balance back in favor of the smaller farm, which tends to be the predominant form of farming in the Southwest. It's just whether or not we, as smaller farmers, can survive through the intervening years. And surely, at some point, policymakers might actually value food and farming rather than just being the equivalent of Northern Ireland when it comes to being put there as a politician. So surely between now and then, they might actually wake up and realize that we are the most important and the biggest industry. And actually we own 70% of the landscape. So we should be looked after.
Cautious optimism. Great stuff. Thank you, Louise. Your thoughts on that same question?
I think the answer is yes. It might look very different, but I think it will be in a better place than it is today. What we need to embrace right now is adaptation. Lots of the focus is on mitigation and addressing problems we have right now. We've got to look forward to say in 2046, how much tree cover do I need on my farm? How many hedges? What does my water system going to look like? And then there is a big debate at the moment that the supply chain from the government, they call it insetting, will pay for this transition. As we've said, there is no money in the supply chain to pay for this transition. So we need to get our asks together, go back and say, this is what we need. And then we have to drive the government to recognise that there needs to be financial support for the adaptation that needs to take place.
Brilliant. Okie dokie. It's not going to be something that gets handed to us on a plate, but the future can be positive if we want to see it that way.
Cornish Mutual, farming insurance experts.
Gosh, what a brilliant conversation we've had today with Louise Manning and Andy Gray. In trying to summarise my thoughts into this week's showstoppers, there are three things which have really come through as themes. Number one is the fact that Louise underlined that what we're thinking about here is a bottom-up approach. So what does that mean? That means we're not reliant, or we're not considering specifically regulation that's top-down, that's imposed on our businesses. We're asking, what is it that we can do for ourselves? What can I do to change my business? So the second point really flows on from that. And there needs to be this challenge. There needs to be this question that Louise touched on right at the end. Why is my business going to be attractive to staff, to family, to the next generation to come back to live on, to stay with? Why am my community going to want to engage with my business, whether that's buying goods or engaging in services that are offered? And we talked a little bit about that community engagement in Series 1, Episode 5 with Kendra Hall and Anna Jones, and then in Series 2, Episode 9 with Amy Jackson. And both of those are brilliant episodes that are well worth going back to listen to. But if the answer to either of those questions isn't positive, if we can't say that we have an attractive agribusiness that people want to engage with, then we probably need to be asking ourselves we need to be engaging with those points that Andy made, that change isn't always a bad thing, that change is also good. Change is an opportunity, that we need to look for the gaps. And perhaps we need to be asking those 4 questions from this report. Number 1, what do we want to achieve? Number 2, what should we keep doing? Number 3, what should we stop doing? And number 4, what can we do instead? So if you take away anything from today's conversation, maybe those are some of the points.
Cornish Mutual, farming insurance experts.
Well, that's it for today's episode. A big thank you to my guests today, Dr Louise Manning and Andy Gray. We hope you've enjoyed this conversation and will continue it around your kitchen table, on the farm, or with your neighbours. If the episode has inspired you to think differently, we hope our next episode rerun will inspire you as well. In a couple of weeks' time, we'll be returning to an episode from Series 4 about enterprise stacking. We are always thinking about the future of the show and would love to hear from you with any feedback, questions or suggestions for the podcast. Send us an email to podcast@cornishmutual.co.uk. Check out the show notes for more information on today's episode, including the link to our podcast disclaimer. You've been listening to Farming Focus, brought to you by Cornish Mutual. I've been Peter Green, and until next time, it's goodbye from me and everyone in the Cornish Mutual podcast team.
Cornish Mutual, farming insurance experts.